Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing well. So for those of you that have been following my channel for a little while now, you may or may not know that since 2018 I have attended the London Film Festival every year. And last year I was able to see more films than I usually do at the festival due to the majority of the lineup being shown online through the BFI player. Now, this year's festival was a slight return to normality in the sense that the majority of the screenings, specifically for the bigger films, were all in person at cinemas in London. Now, unfortunately for me, I can't get to London as easy as some other people can, which means I was purely relying on whatever lineup of films were going to be selected for the BFI player. And annoyingly, from my perspective, the selection that they had this year for films that were showing only online was very slim, especially compared to last year, where it was almost the entire lineup of films was both in person and on the BFI player, whereas this year it was very slim pickings. And annoyingly, that does mean that I missed out on some of the big films that were showing at the festival that I was really looking forward to, such as The French Dispatch, Last Night in Soho, and Spencer. However, with that being said, I still tried to make the most of the situation that I had, and I was able to watch 4 films this year online as part of the London Film Festival. And the first of those films was called Boiling Point, directed by Philip Barantini and starring Stephen Graham and Vinette Robinson, and is a one-take film set in a London restaurant on the busiest day of the year, which happens to be the last Friday before Christmas. Now, one thing I want to make clear, not just for this film, but for pretty much all 4 of the films that I saw at the festival, is that I didn't know that much about said films before going into them, compared to previous years where I know exactly what films I want to see and I have a little bit of an idea of what I'm getting myself in for. This year, all 4 of the films that I saw, I genuinely didn't know what I was getting myself in for. And I've got to say, I was genuinely blown away by Boiling Point. This is probably one of the best uses of the one take gimmick since Sebastian Schipper's Victoria in 2015. It genuinely impressed me so much, not just from a camera work perspective, but from a performance perspective as well. The fact that all the performances and the whole of the script are so tight and compact genuinely makes it feel like you're almost watching a play rather than a film. It's so tightly rehearsed and everything happens at just the right points that it's just so good. Now, whereas some one take movies can feel a bit gimmicky, this film does not feel like that in the slightest. The use of the one take approach feels necessary for the scenario and the location that you are in, because if you've ever worked in a restaurant or a kitchen environment, you will know that it is hectic from the moment the shift starts, or even before the shift starts. It can be chaotic as hell, and everyone is at that point where they're about to explode with anger because of the amount of tension and amount of pressure that is going on all at once for everybody in that building. And Boiling Point captures that absolutely perfectly. And again, that's not just down to the camera work, but that is also through the performances as well, which I think are all perfect in this movie, especially from Vinette Robinson and Stephen Graham. Stephen Graham is probably one of my favourite British actors working today. I think he's incredibly underrated. And here he gives probably my favourite performance of his since This Is England. He is absolutely incredible in this film, and you can tell that if someone just talks to him in the wrong way just once, you can tell he is going to snap. And then you have Vinette Robinson, who is probably the only character in the film, or one of the only characters in the film, that does actually snap. And when she does, it is so cathartic to an extent. Like, you can tell that this has been building up in her for quite a long time, and you can tell she is saying what a lot of people in that line of work are probably wanting to say so badly to their managers, but just can't. And she just does it in this one moment in the film. And again, it just feels so needed, and it just feels kind of cathartic, not just for her, but for the audience as well. Um, as well as being a very tightly compact and a incredibly tense 90-minute movie, because I tell you what, this is one of the most anxiety filled films I've seen in quite some time. um, I also really appreciated how the film also gives other characters a chance to breathe. The focus is not just on Stephen Graham's character or Vinette Robinson's character. You get time, even if it is very, very brief, you do get little moments just to focus on some of the other people working in this restaurant, whether it's a waitress who is being treated very horribly by a customer, or whether it is a mother and son working in the kitchen and the mother discovers that her son has been self harming. There are tons of these little moments of fragility and almost a sense of a personal sense to them that just makes it feel more human and real. And I really loved how the film wasn't just this incredibly chaotic and tense 90 minutes all done in one take. The fact that they gave these other characters that, in the grand scheme of things, are somewhat significant to the main story, the fact that it gave them those little moments to breathe and develop, I thought was genuinely quite genius. The next film that I watched was this Hungarian World War II film called Natural Light. Again, I didn't know much about this film going into it. I was just really intrigued from the screenshots that I saw and the fact that it was set in World War II. And I'm just going to say this right off the bat. This is hands down one of the best shot and just generally well presented films of the year. The cinematography and sound design in this movie is immaculate. I cannot praise that aspect of the film enough. The film really heavily emphasizes this grey and brown color palette that pretty much is consistent from the moment the film starts to the moment it ends. And that color palette mixed with the very detailed sound design creates this very murky and desolate and very depressing atmosphere for the film that again works hand in hand with the story that it is trying to tell. And like I said, I loved everything about the way this film was presented. The cinematography is gorgeous and the sound design fits it perfectly. I also thought the story was very interesting. The characters, on the other hand, though, are a bit hit and miss for me because you there's very little to latch onto in terms of liking or being on board with what a character is feeling. That being said, though, I loved how pretty much all the emotions you needed to get from said actors were being portrayed purely through their facial expressions. There were no moments of flat out monologuing or that sort of thing where you're being told it verbally. You are pretty much just purely reliant on the main character's facial expressions to get across as to how he's feeling. And I thought that in those terms, it was genuinely well done, and you could tell that there were many moments where he genuinely did not want to be in the position that he was in. Though the story is very interesting, like I said, the facial expression is all you have to latch on to these characters and feel for them and connect to them. Outside of that, character development or anything like that is kind of non existent. This film purely just focuses on the atmosphere and this one character's trajectory through it all, and that's about it. Also, the pacing is going to be hit and miss for some people. I personally didn't have a problem with it, but I can see some people being turned off by just how slowly paced this film is. After that, I watched Hit the Road, which is directed by Panar Panahi, the son of famous Iranian director Jafar Panahi. And again, I didn't know what I was getting myself into with this movie because I've never seen a Jafar Panahi film. And to be honest, I've never delved into Iranian cinema ever. So I don't quite know what the general approach and style of Iranian cinema is. Um, but from this film, I will say that I genuinely liked it, but I didn't necessarily love it as much as some people have at other festivals. There's a lot to like about this film, but there were quite a few moments where I just couldn't connect to it in a way that I think a lot of other people have been able to. The performances and the script are without a doubt the film's strongest aspects, especially the chemistry between the main four actors. I thought they were all absolutely brilliant, and they both work hand in hand to deliver some moments of genuine tenderness, but also some genuinely quite funny moments as well. There were one or two parts in this film that genuinely had me laughing, purely down to how they were executed. Um, and like I said, there are quite a few moments where you get these kind of tender conversations between each of the family members talking to each other, and it works for the sake of the moment in the film that they happen, and just for the sake of the overall story that they're trying to tell with these characters. Those moments do work really well, and I think they are the film's strongest aspects, along with those moments of comedy. However, with that being said, in terms of the film's tone and story, I genuinely didn't know what it was trying to do. I understand that the film is very vague in terms of its plot and where the characters are going. I understand that it's deliberately very vague in that sense. And part of me actually really appreciated that. There is this one road trip film, and you don't really know where they're going. You get vague glimpses of where they're coming from, but in terms of where they're going, it's all very vague, and where they end up is also very vague. So, in that sense, I can appreciate that aspect. But in terms of how it is telling its story, what the end goal is, and the general tone of the film, again, I didn't quite know what the film was trying to go for. One minute it feels like it's trying to do one thing, and the next it feels like it's trying to do something else. Um, and it kind of left me by the end of the film feeling a little conflicted, just a little bit. Because by the time the film had finished, I genuinely didn't know what to think of the film, and even thinking about it now, I still don't know how to 100% feel about this movie. The last film I watched at the festival was Flea, which is this documentary animation hybrid film that genuinely floored me. This is one of the best films of the year, without a doubt, and is probably the most profound film of the year. Um, and when I say it's a hybrid between documentary and animation, it uses the narration of this one person's story, this one person who's telling his story of what happened to him as the documentary side of things. The story he's telling is being completely animated, so that rather than relying on stock footage from the period of time that he's referring to try and cobble together something that is somewhat reminiscent of what he's trying to tell, they instead just flat out animate it and try and portray the things he was feeling at the time through different styles of animation. And I think it works so well. For those of you that haven't heard of Flea, it's basically this one person's story about how he grew up in the late 80s to early 90s, trying to leave Afghanistan and dealing with things like immigration and human trafficking, trying to just get into Europe. Um, and just that alone leads to kind of endless possibilities with how they could have portrayed it in terms of the animation that is on show, and the way that they do portray certain things like human trafficking or people trying to leave amidst a country in collapse are really kind of distressing to see in the film. There is one moment in particular, I won't go into too much detail, obviously, for those of you that haven't seen the film, but there is one moment in particular where it recounts the experience of being stuck in a shipping container with a load of other people who are being human trafficked from one country to another. And the way that they portray that just through the visuals alone and the animation genuinely put a lump in my throat and almost reduced me to tears, because it is so effective at what it is trying to get across, um, that it genuinely kind of leaves you speechless by the end of it. If you do not feel something after watching this film, then you might not be human, because it is such an eye-opening and at times quite traumatizing film to get through. But it is handled with so much respect and nuance for the subject matter that you feel like you're learning something as well as being told this very excruciating and hard to believe story, even though it is something that we hear so much about in the news nowadays. So, guys, those are the 4 films I saw at this year's London Film Festival. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what your thoughts are on some of these films in the comments below if you were able to see it. And if you attended the London Film Festival, let me know what your favourite film of the festival was. I'd love to know what those are in the comments below. If you like the video, then give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Bye.